the antiques business is a fashion business.
Yeah.
Things ebb and flow, and what the public finds interesting and not changes. And so you can live off your mistakes if you stay in business long enough.
You're listening to A Life Creative, real conversations with artists, designers, and other creatives about how they build, sustain, and evolve their careers.
Fritz Karch is a collector, stylist, and editorial director known for his imaginative approach to design and decoration. An active collector since the age of 11, Fritz established the collecting department at Martha Stewart Living, where he served for 15 years as editorial director and helped create the Martha by Mail catalog. Since 2013, he's brought his deep knowledge of objects and styling to MR Architecture's decor department, adding a personalized layer to interiors projects and overseeing styling for photo shoots and special events. For over 35 years, Fritz has also run an antiques business in Hopewell, New Jersey, where he continues to practice the art of hunting, gathering, and trading unique finds. So I'm very excited to have Fritz Karch on today. Fritz was my first boss and actually was responsible for hiring me at Martha Stewart.
One of our first, when we started this podcast, FYI, we said, wouldn't it be a dream to have Fritz on?
He has an incredible way of telling stories, and he's incredibly entertaining, but he's also incredibly talented. And what I love about him is that he has such a full range of knowledge about an infinite number of things. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to scratch the surface on all of that in this interview today, but it will definitely be entertaining, and it will definitely be informative. And I think you're just going to really love talking to him.
His story. I shared an office with him at the magazine.
Did you have any room?
I did. It's very, very different. I was very intimidated at first because, his collections and his stacks they're organized to him.
It's organized chaos.
Yes, and they're really organized, and he could probably find anything he wanted. But when you're sharing an office with somebody, it's the difference in our desks were just amazing because he the way his mind works and the contrast of his partner who is a minimalist.
Yes.
That's an interesting dynamic as well.
I think we'll talk a little bit about because they complement each other very well.
Yeah, opposites attract.
Fritz, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I was saying in our introduction that you were my first boss at Martha Stewart, and I've learned so much from you, and I'm so excited to kind of get into some of those conversations. And as a collector, we wanted to talk initially about how did you first get introduced to collecting?
I was about 10, and one branch of my family they had a business that they did people's driveways and roads, and just outside of, I grew up in an early part of New Jersey, and just outside of town, they were digging a new road to make
asphalt roads or gravel roads.
It was just woods, and they were putting in a road, and they hit the original 19th century dump of the town, which was large, and of course now it was all forest, but it went, and it turned out someone I met later lived in the one old farmhouse that was the original property there, and she had been the first to be rooting around, and she put one of her children through college on the bottles out of the first layer. But by the time we were able to ride our bicycles there, it was way up this hill and out of town. And I was fascinated. I was a little junior archaeologist, and we would spend all day digging around, finding all kinds of
And those are apothecary bottles. Those are
it was bits and parts of iron, everything, but the bottles, glass survives well, and pottery. And it was a window into I learned about, and because my dad's family had been in the town many generations, they knew the history of all the stores and the development of the town, and they'd be like, oh, that dairy was here, and oh, that's the pharmacy name before it was called Marsh's, it was called this. And I learned through finding all these bottles what was the history of the town, which I found really, packaging wise, I was just hooked. And then we started finding other stuff, but there were these really professional dealers that it was like you were in Egypt. They were digging trenches they'd go 7 feet down in this very systematic way, because in that world, what they call whiskey and bitter bottles can be very valuable. I mean, then they would sell for more than $1,000. Now those same kinds of bottles, if you find them in good condition, they'll pay $60,000-$70,000.
So a bitter bottle is sort of medicinal.
Well, they were, it's like the early
concoction
Liquors.
packaging.
Right.
No, it had to do with novelty packaging. That to get you to buy your brand from all the other brands, because half of them were snake oil anyway. They would be amazing shapes. Like there's an Indian princess, the bottle would be, or it would be an ear of corn, or it would be an early cabin.
Oh, I love that.
And then depending what glass color they used that day in the. They would have the fancy production in the glassworks. At the end of the day, they would crank out bottles. So there'd be one rare day where that's where they can be $60,000. It's like the only one known of the blue 1872 cabin. It gets in like everything else into minutia. But they're incredible shapes.
Yeah.
And like, and they're beautiful in the quality of the glass.
You mentioned that you had a mentor that sort of taught you a lot of things. Do you remember that story in our earlier conversation?
Well, it may be my great aunt. That same branch of the family. It was her son at that point that ran the road business, but she had been an antique dealer since the 30s. And when I was a young adult and couldn't afford a car, she had a car, but she was too old and didn't want to drive around anymore other than in town. So I would drive her around, and her house, she would hire, I was young and able, so I would do chores for her. And I was fascinated by her house. There'd be like 3 layers of rugs in the living room, and there was stuff. I remember on the back porch there was like 5 step-back cupboards, and you'd open the kitchen drawers where you'd think you're getting a spatula, and everything would be the highest, fanciest silver, but nothing matched. It was like all the loose bits. And she would have like, everything tastes better with silver. And, so she had the best of everything, but all like the odd bits she hadn't been able to sell.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated. And
did she know everything about everything as you do?
Well, she knew her era. And then her son bought a house where they were, making another new development. This would have been in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And I guess they were getting a swimming pool. Mm-hmm. And they hit the original outhouse, because what you would do is the outhouses would become obsolete. Yeah. So you'd fill them in and you'd make a new one. And they found one of the original outhouse locations when they're making the pool. And of course, the contents of an outhouse is soft landing, and it's a natural preservative. So they would fill them all up with all their garbage when they were done using them. So then 150 years later, and it's fascinating, there'd be all these medical panics. Like in the 1840s, there was one particular kind of plague here. I don't remember what it was, but they didn't really understand how it transferred, but they decided it was the dishes. So everybody threw out all their dishes. So then, boom, you're like hysterical, throwing all your
down the toilet,
down the like outhouse, and getting all new because it has germs. And so then suddenly you're finding entire sets of dinnerware and particularly iron does really well in that kind of environment. And they started digging, and it was unbelievable. It was a really early one. I had another branch of the family had an old farm, and they put this big addition on the house, like a giant family room, and they took all the barn siding with the advertisings from the faded barn and made it the paneling of the room. But I remember at the end of the room had this big fireplace with glass shelves, and it was all the bottles, the history of like the best bottles they'd found, and all different kinds of categories. But
so understandably, there's other people in your family that sort of just
that
kind of...
You got the bug from them.
I was always very interested in history and in early things. I don't know. I just found it like I'm curious about how things are made and the use of materials.
Yeah.
And did that influence at all how you decided to study, like going to college and things like that, or how did you kind of balance those two things?
No, I just always art was my favorite class, and I always liked artistic things. So high school wasn't a good era for me, and art class was really the only one I liked. So the only thing I could imagine going to was art school.
Yeah.
Which, I came from a very practical kind of merchant working class family. They was like, thank God your grandfather isn't alive to hear this. You want to go where? It's like you're supposed to be a school teacher or an undertaker. Those were practical.
And how did you decide on a school?
Well,
Did you want to stay on the East Coast?
on my
first of
mother's
all?
side of the family, they were all educators. So
Yeah.
I was surrounded by my grandmother, all the
Okay.
aunts, everybody. And so they were, and my grandmother had gone to college, which was very unusual
Yeah.
for women in the 20s. And because she wasn't of any fancy means. And so they highly valued education, and it was expected that we would go to college. That was a big goal since we were kids. And so my parents were incredibly supportive about like going around and looking at schools. So I remember going to Rhode Island School of Design and looking at it and being fascinated. But I chose not to go there because it felt like a board game to me. Like they were so rigid, you couldn't switch around departments. You had to pick a department after freshman foundation, and then you had, if you wanted to change, you had to go back to go and start over and pay over. And I liked the campus at the school I went to, which was Tyler School of Art, which is outside of Philadelphia. It was the old Widener estate. So it was this beautiful, bucolic place, and it was the old one branch of the estate.
And that also did have a foundation year as far as
it
art
was
school.
the same structure, and it did have graduate studies like Yale. So there were serious people there. Because it was a great size for me. It was, I think there was about 1,200 people totally. Some of the students were day students, but most of the, the undergrads stayed
in the dorms
full time, and it worked out great. And it wasn't, on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And you were able to
And
have
suddenly, it's the first time I'd ever been around other eccentric, artsy-minded people.
Yeah.
It was, I thought I had been like reborn on a fantasy planet. It was amazing.
Did you find more of the flexibility that you were looking for there?
It was amazing because they weren't that organized after foundation. And so I just kind of took every department. I kind of wheedled not getting like, oh, I'm going to be a painter.
Yeah.
No, it's like, so I would take all the different, glass blowing and weaving and pottery, and then I would take printmaking, and then I took photography and color photography, and I just loved it all.
Yeah.
Because I realized that I was not going to be the next most famous artist. I wasn't going to be a serious painter.
Yeah.
I didn't
But
really
was
have
it illustration or painting? Did you?
The painting department was the big important department there, other than the photography department and the metals department, which I knew I wasn't going to be a jeweler. And so, I ended up in illustration, which actually was very useful because I took some basic graphic design courses, learned about typography, and actually that did me well when I came to New York City.
Yeah.
So technically I graduated in the illustration department.
And you said when we initially talked to you that your move to New York happened in stages.
Yes.
And can you explain a little bit about
it was very hard to get a job. That was
Yeah.
at that period things were not great. That's when New York was at its worst with Koch, and it was going bankrupt, and it was funky and rough.
Yeah.
Like I was so naive, and I didn't know my way around, and I didn't understand about if the light, well, most of them were broken, but the light on the top of the stairs of the subway, if it was green, it meant the door was open and it was going.
I had to learn that too.
But people would be living at the bottom of the stairs, or they would be dead at the bottom of the stairs in some cases, and you'd be walking into like an unidentified crime scene.
Yes.
I mean, even when I had my first proper apartment, which was years later, I remember on 14th Street, on the 123 line, there was a woman who lived in a mattress on the landing. And it was like, you better walk on that side. This is our home.
Yes. But your first jobs in New York, you freelanced.
Yes.
Yeah. So how did you get those jobs? Were they
networking
connections?
through friends that I had gone to school with, and my one friend had moved here. She got me a freelance job at Abram Art Books, which was a great place to be. And, we would just do technical graphic design things for the publication of books. And I learned about publishing, which was really interesting about, they had a whole in-house design department. And, each year they would pick how many titles they were producing, and then each designer would be responsible for how many books.
Yeah.
Whether they were brand new books, I remember they were like making the all book of MASH. It's like they would do high and low, and then they would be doing, they did every esoteric catalog for any Yale, museum exhibition.
Yeah.
So it was high and low, but it was really interesting, and it was downtown. It was great.
Was the network that you were sort of hanging out with people you went to school with, or people you just sort of met in the city? Kind of, you know what I mean? Like when you...
Both.
Oh, yeah.
Combination.
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
And everyone was kind of doing different things, and that they're like, I need help with this, or...
Well, some of them were on serious career paths where they had, landed jobs in, graphic design firms or ad agencies or whatever their era was, or they were assisting successful artists.
Right.
But the first real job I had landed out of school was at a small ad agency in New Jersey.
Okay.
And that was, interesting, and I had an entry-level salary, but it was fine, Right. But then they lost their big client, and then they got rid of all the employees that...
Yeah.
And so that was a harsh lesson. I was like, I'm not so interested in like the fancy title and all the status of the firm. I just want to be paid fairly. So that's when I really started just freelancing and production, because it paid by the hour.
Yeah.
Right.
It was like really lucrative. I'd be, there'd be some young kid that like had enormous student debt from going to RISD and had the prodigious, they studied with the most important person, and they're making less money than McDonald's working in one of the fanciest design firms.
Yeah,
it was
because
like,
it's their first job.
I'm like, life's too short.
Yeah.
I'm over the status. I just want to be paid.
Yeah. So,
what was your first introduction to styling?
It was the great era. I'm sure it is now too, but we just don't know where they are. It was clubs, and we would go out. Oh, we were like, young and crazy, dancing. So you'd fall in with this whole gang of people that we'd go to all these different clubs, and you'd meet people. And I met this one guy, because I didn't know what a stylist was. And they're like, oh, he's a very successful stylist. I'm like, and photographers, I'm like, oh, what's that? And then they knew that I was interested in stuff, or they must have been impressed with how I like put my apartment together. And they're like, oh, will you? So they would hire me when they get a big job to be the assistant, to just be the gopher. Like, can you iron? I'm like, yes. Yeah. And I couldn't believe the pay was amazing. At that time, I had a full-time gig at a kind of branding graphic design agency. And they'd be like, you have to call in sick. I need you for this job. And technically, I wasn't a full-time employee.
Yeah.
And I would go and suddenly get paid $600 in one day to just iron as fast as I can. I'm like, this is nuts. And I was fascinated by learning all the different divisions of commercial. I didn't even know that commercial photography was this enormous industry here, that it was giant. There was something like 75,000 commercial photographers in Manhattan area or the boroughs. And it divided up very clearly. There was like corporate work, there was fashion work, there was magazine work and book work.
Catalog. Yeah.
So, and then it was either you're doing still life, or you're doing garments, or you're doing food. And I just kind of assisted. So I was on any job. We would be crazy jobs, Oh, it's fur coats in the St. Regis, or in the middle of summer. It's like they're throwing baby powder on all the fur coats, and the poor models are sweating. It's like insane. But I learned quickly just the culture and kind of what I liked and didn't like. And I really was fascinated by still life, because it was more about objects. Yeah. Because being around it and then saying, you would get a job, you'd be so thrilled to get like a job on your own, like, because they didn't, you start because everyone else would say no because the pay was so bad and it was so much work, like an entire Thanksgiving table, but you would learn quickly. And I found that I preferred the still life world because
of your background, you think?
Well, no, because objects are honest.
Yep.
A fork is a fork, and it's the size that it is. And when you suddenly get roped into also, can't you just get the clothing for everyone at the table? No one tells the truth about what size they actually are. And that you're responsible there. They're all ordering their fantasy, not their reality. And you'd be like, well, none of these shirts fit. And I'm like, I cannot.
Because you're a double XL.
Yeah, I cannot. Yeah, and you're not in a position to tell them that they shouldn't be eating that lunch, So I quickly and also those were the more lucrative.
Yeah.
It was, and also it was a carnival. One of the main things that attracted me, I think, to the still life world was and especially the food people. There was a real professionalism and a camaraderie. Like there was a respect between all the different factions. Like you would never tell a food person that their egg looked weird, and they would question prop based on its function or not because like, oh, I hate blue.
Yes.
You know, and on a fashion shoot, you have the makeup artist and the hairstylist and then the assistant, seamstresses, and they all had an opinion. They'd be like, oh, pillows? And suddenly all the creative directors are questioning like 4 months of looking for the perfect pillow because some buffoon who holds the comb
doesn't like
has
stripes.
an opinion. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is chaos. Absolute chaos. And so I decided I didn't really want to do that on a daily basis.
So then you started to evolve styling and you started working on catalogs?
Well, the guy that I trained with that I was lucky enough to get to assist with, his name was Jeffrey W. Miller, because there's 2 Jeffrey Miller stylists. He was very successful and very talented and a great showman. And he started getting more work than he really... and work that he didn't necessarily find that intellectually stimulating. So he said, well, why don't I just take them all and then you can do them. I'll be the front man and then we'll just split the money. So we had this great gig going.
That's great.
We do 4 or 5 a week of the, for all the ladies magazines, all the food columns or the makeover, some real person's suburban kitchen or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And that worked great for like 6 months, but then as people change, things happen, schedules change, and we got stuck because he'd go to all the shoots in the morning and be the front man and present like he was doing it all. And one day, I would just be there to put it all out the day before and take it all away and actually procure it all. And he slowly got caught where they realized he wasn't actually doing it all himself. And they'd be like, well, why are we paying him if this one might be cheaper? And so then it got awkward because of course I was not like that. I'd say, they're calling me up. What should I do? And he'd be, I'm like, do you want to like call them? And he'd be like, no, I don't want that job anyway. You do it. So slowly then we just started dividing things up that way.
So then how did you get your introduction to Martha Stewart?
Well, I was just lucky that all the photographers that the stylist that I worked with happened to be was the entire community of the most interesting artists, like up and coming photographers or established ones that they started using when they began the Martha Living magazine. So I already was familiar with the photographers.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So then
because I worked for them.
Would they recommend you to work on projects?
No. It was another one of those that we got caught where they had hired Jeffrey to do, I forget what the subject was, and it was with this amazing woman, Susan Spungen, who was the food editor and created the food department there. And, I can imagine they were dancing as fast as they could, and something changed, and where, you literally, the prop has to function. So if it's an ice cream soda or it's a full turkey platter, and everything had changed overnight where, soup and cupcakes became iced tea. And so I had to go, and I just said to the photographer, I will go home and I'll get what we need. I'll be back in 40 minutes because I didn't live that far away from where the studio was. But the creative director at Martha, who founded the magazine with Martha Stewart, her name was Gail Towie, she came to the shoot and we got outed. She's like, well, who's he and why is he bringing things? And so, because she thought she'd hired Jeffrey W. Miller.
Right. And
then Jeffrey was busy putting out fires at 3 other shoots, so he never came back. And then she,
figured it out.
And she's like, oh, well, why don't we just hire him?
And that was the start.
So that's how,
Just a quick pause in the show to ask a favor. Please subscribe, like, and share. It really makes a difference in helping others find us. Thanks for listening, and if you have any suggestions, you can reach us through our website, alifecreativepod.com, or find us on social. Now back to the episode. So at Martha, they started hiring you for freelance, and then
yes, just as a freelance
did
stylist.
That evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I was
Were
fascinated.
there departments back then, Fritz?
It was crazy. I was fascinated. You would go to the Times Warner building in Midtown, and you would go to like the 29th floor and go in some like fire door, and there was it must have been like the in-house legal department, and it was all these abandoned offices that sort of had, and that's where the Martha Stewart Living staff, which probably was 14 people, that's where they were housed because they were owned by Time Warner.
Right.
And you would go there for meetings.
Right.
And you would get your charge of, I mean, in the beginning, I mostly did what they called entertaining stories, which are putting on a whole party, and it's all about the food and the experience. And those are the first projects I did there. And then, you know, I liked all the people. I loved all the photographers they worked with. It was, you know, you go to really interesting places.
When did the department of collecting kind of evolved?
Well, I think that they had pretty much by then established after 4 issues, I think they started to get the rhythm of what subjects they liked. And Martha loved old stuff and collected things because I think she just found a superior quality of goods and color. I think a lot of it was about palette for her and function at, you know, a bargain price or she couldn't just find on the modern market what she was looking for. I mean, she lived in an old house. She restored her old house. She had a great sense of like the past has a lot to offer.
Yeah.
And they were doing collecting stories, but I think it got so big so fast that the in-house staff couldn't handle it anymore. And I don't know if it's when they started the first television show, because the whole...
For PBS.
The in-house style department, which was very small, some of them went to run the television segment because they kept franchising bigger and bigger and bigger. So they started asking me if I would freelance. They would, in the beginning, they would give me a topic and then just go execute it of collecting because they knew I was interested in... Because a lot of what I would bring to the shoots would be old things or vintage things.
Right. So it's just a sort of natural progression into this department.
And then you also, when I met you, you hired me at Martha by Mail, which was the retail catalog.
Yeah.
So how did your part of that evolve?
Once I was out on my own, back to, you know, the early days of splitting things, they were starting to revamp bigger projects, but in retail, and none of the stylists in New York wanted to work that hard for that cheap. So there's this incredible creative director who had come out of like the department store world. I think he started at Bloomingdale's, then he went to Conrad's, and then he had gone to California and was working with Williams-Sonoma to rebrand Pottery Barn. And he said, oh, you need to come to New York where there's a much bigger world of photography and this and that. So he convinced them as he was rebranding what the Pottery Barn catalog would look like, and he redid the logo and the whole identity.
This is Robert.
Yeah, Robert Valentine. Yeah. And, of course, he thought, oh, this will be great. But everybody in New York turned their nose up at him like, you want us to work for what? Because the budgets weren't impressive. So they all shunned it.
Yeah.
So suddenly, like, who's the eager young innocent who, like, doesn't realize what they're in for? And so I did 1 week with the great photographer Maria Robledo. And I guess they liked the results. But the Williams-Sonoma people from San Francisco hated working in New York because of the time change. They had to work like 18 hours.
Yeah.
And it was all just overwhelming for them. So they said, would you come to California and train local people, because they liked what we did, how we do what we do.
Right.
And I had family there. I thought, oh my God, I'm getting paid to go to San Francisco. This is so exciting. But eventually they gave me a contract so for 3 years, I did all the Pottery Barn catalogs.
Flying back and forth.
Because it was 30 or 40 pages, the first one I worked on, and it was up to 160 with multiple teams shooting simultaneously. It got huge.
Yeah.
And that was a great learning curve. I mean, it was an amazing opportunity. And so when the months I wasn't in the West doing catalog work, I would be in New York, and then I would do Martha work.
Okay.
And then slowly Martha would be like, oh, they put me on contracts saying, can we have this many days a year we'll work around your schedule. And so it just evolved for a couple of years that way.
Okay.
Of me doing many things. So I think when they started Martha by Mail, to answer your question, I had all this catalog experience, understood how the whole machine engine ran, what was the process, what was involved, what were the finances of the production of the imagery.
Yeah.
And so I was useful in that way.
Well, and what was interesting is you didn't just do the styling part of that. You also headed up product development, which is where I started working with you as well.
Yeah, at Martha, yeah.
And was a lot of that product development based on vintage items? Not necessarily.
Well, it came from, there's this incredible woman that was already there, Silke Stoddard, and she had this catalog from her homeland in Germany called Manufactum.
Oh, I love
That was like this dream of it was like the Sears catalog, but with
stylish.
amazing taste.
Yeah.
Where you didn't just get the cheap one, you only got the most functioning. But it was like the Bauhaus had designed everything.
The handmade brushes that are with willow. Yeah.
So that became the roadmap. Martha loved this catalog. And of course, it's only in Europe.
Yeah.
And so that was the inspiration, I think. Okay. And it was all meant to be utilitarian, useful things people actually would use. But then it evolved because the craft department at Martha Stewart Living was so influential and vibrant. So many incredible people came up with all these things there that they started wanting to make kits of how you could like decorate a cookie or like make a Christmas ornament or what. I can't remember all.
And that's what you were working on, Marcy,
Yes,
right?
that's what I remember.
And so these very complicated kits became a big part of the subject matter, and it was all seasonal.
Yeah.
Because the magazine was always based on seasonal celebrating.
Yeah. How many issues a year was the Martha by Mail? Do you guys remember?
Well, the
4
first
at
one
point.
was a pamphlet that was just
An insert?
insert into the magazine. And I think that's where they thought, oh, we see potential here. And so the first one wasn't that many pages, but it was a standalone thing they actually mailed. And then it evolved quickly. And so I think we were doing 4 a year.
Do you remember the first product? What was the most popular product you think the first catalog was?
For me, it was the lip balm kit.
Lip balm kit?
Lip balm kit. Runaway hit, the lip balm kit. Which turned into like a personal care category where we made like lotions and all sorts of
Well, we had talked earlier with Fritz too that the collecting department really influenced retail as far as the reintroduction of things that were in the magazine, and people started recognizing them and collecting them, and sort of the rebirth of an interest in something like ironstone or transferware or jadeite, and I think that's kind of it's fascinating with the influence that it had, as far as even in when you go to a flea market, all of a sudden you're looking at things differently, and I think that's part of what you sort of grew from the collecting department.
Well, that was the fun part and frustrating of the Pottery Barn, is because it's a very interesting challenge as a stylist, because they want you to elevate the product there and put it into a context that's completely envious and desirable that the public just can't help themselves. They run to the phone and buy it.
Yeah.
And so, but they sell so many things. So of course you have to try to make the environment of what they're selling in the best possible combination of things. But then how do you upgrade the overall thing? Because so I would really focus on, well, what aren't they selling that I can actually get into this room to make it look like, something. And that was really fun. But then for them, it was a frustration because everyone called on the phone and wanted to buy everything in the pictures that was not the product that I had brought, some vintage hat box or some crazy book or whatever it may be. So Martha was similar in a way that people would start calling, like wanting the paint color on the wall of some decorating story or the exact plate that the cupcake was under or whatever.
It was the reason why we had to do the resource. Remember, after every story, we had to every detail had to be back there because people would write in. I didn't. What you were just talking about tomato?
Yeah, I was just gonna say because simultaneously, while you're not busy enough doing your styling, collecting, editor, working on Martha by Mail, you always and have been for the past 35 years had your own antiques business at the tomato factory as well.
Yes, that's true. That was my sideline because being raised by practical people, I looked around and I'm like, I don't see very many old stylists.
Right.
Like where are the the people at the top of their game with the most talent being wheeled in and paid well. I don't see that, and there we are, as you know, dragging out of the back of a van you can't stand up in. Like, it's for the young and the ambitious. Yes. So I thought, I need plan B, right? And I was always interested in paying attention to careers where the longer you do it, like being a fine artist, the better and the more engaged you are, that you don't become obsolete. Like, I think architecture is that way. I would think medicine would be that way, hopefully. And antiques are that way, that the more you learn, like, you see a lot of old antique dealers. So I was like, oh, maybe this could work. I better get started now because this seems really complicated to me. So if I start in my 30s, maybe by the time I'm where I'm now, I'll actually know what I'm doing.
But it also helped with the market, right? Because for doing it for that number of years, the ebbs and flows of, like, what is selling, what's not selling, what's waning, what's all of a sudden popular. And I think that really helps with, one, what you're selling, and two, editorially,
right,
what's a hidden gem, what's, nobody collects this, and I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, well, that was one of our charges in the collecting column, was to find things that would be fun for people to go look for, or they may already have that are neglected, that could be reborn in new uses or new ways that are accessible and actually a bargain.
Yes.
Or not available at all in the modern world.
But you also taught people that a collection, would you say, if it's past 5, that it becomes a collection?
Oh, that's a rule. People are like, do you have more than 5? Then it's a collection. Yeah. But you're safe under 5.
And it's not even about the budget of it, because some people, that we've worked with, collect diner napkins, or, things that are just so personal to them. And I love that idea of that it's not about that expensive thing. It's about something that you keep seeing over and over again that you want to have.
Well, that's what I loved about it. Yeah. I mean, it's back to the dump when I'm 10, I was just as fascinated digging in the dirt for free as I would be going to a fancy store and admiring something.
And one of the things that you had mentioned too, that kind of on that is, you said there's different types of antique dealers.
Yes. I found, trying to analyze the industry, because most people, it's like a game show. They're always, like the Antique Roadshow. That's just a game show focusing on the money. They're chasing the money. It's all about, I paid this and it's worth that.
Yeah, they really want to know what it's worth.
And to me, I was much more fascinated by the original that's based on, which is an English show.
Right.
And it also had a children's division that was amazing.
For toys and things like that?
No. Of young kids that were collectors that would bring in their thing to be analyzed. And it was much more educational that, the British are very polite and very charming. But last time they were like, to teach you a lesson, they would totally take down some poor woman from the Midlands because she thinks she has, like Louis XV's clock. And it's actually just some funny panache. And they'd set her up, they'd ask them, why they came to this conclusion and what were their, the clues that made you think this and that, and they'd be like, well, very good, but actually, and then they would tell them they had a piece of junk that was not what they thought it was at all, and it was all about the education, not the money, which I found much more interesting, or just the history of it. Some decoupage screen that was like half falling apart that looked really interesting. And it turned out to be the most famous legendary boxer in the history of London when boxing was illegal. And it gave you this whole history of sport in England in the 19th century. I was like, this is fascinating stuff.
Well, what was the kind of dealers that you were defining? Like, what if you had to title them, different type of antique dealers?
Just me observing, I noticed that, a lot of the really famous antique houses, it's generational. Where they've been, just like art galleries, they've been in business for generations. And so if they make a terrible mistake or overpay for something, one generation, it becomes the next generation's bargain because they can live off their own inventory because they've been in business so long. And as you said, the antiques business is a fashion business.
Yeah.
Things ebb and flow, and what the public finds interesting and not changes. And so you can live off your mistakes if you stay in business long enough.
Yeah.
Where another kind of dealer I found would only try to present the best, most unusual and beautiful things they found and not compete with the customer. They would always present and sell the best they found. And really what they lived with it at home was all the mistakes, the things they couldn't sell. There's a very famous store that's been celebrated. This couple started, I think it's called the Lacquered Chest in London. And she was a famous one for it's what they couldn't sell she would bring home. And then she would make these magical worlds just out of the stuff nobody. And when she would go to all the high-powered auctions and sales, she would buy everything that all the big-time dealers weren't interested in. She would make this world out of the neglected stuff, which I was fascinated by. And then there's the people that they're more doing it as a sport and a hobby, and they keep all the best things. Like if they get an amazing estate, they'll always keep the rarest and the best.
Yeah.
And live with it, and they only sell off everything else.
They sell that rest to keep the best.
And so you know those stores when you go in, they're just kind of not that inspiring.
Yeah.
And you're questioning how they put all this stuff together. And so those are the three basic, whether they're full-time or part-time,
And we talked about earlier that, you did revive an interest in certain heritage pieces, I think, through all the years at Martha. And you saw that. How did you pick them? Did you just, is it for you keep seeing the same thing over and over again, or do you just say, you know what, no one's really paying attention to this particular thing?
Well, that was my job, to present to whoever the editor-in-chief was, and to, our founder also. I mean, it never said Fritz Living.
Yeah.
So it isn't what I wanted necessarily. My job was within that purview and that philosophy to present ideas. And so I would think about where are there opportunities? If I was a shopper out on a weekend going to different secondhand venues, what's here that's fun to look at? And then I would present ideas. So it was really a group decision often.
Often that.
And sometimes they would be, you'd get lucky and the editor would see it and be like, great, go do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes the ideas were dictated to you. They weren't all my ideas. I mean, Martha had what she naturally was interested in, like what she did to jadeite. That was like diner china that cost $1, and now look, they lock it up like it's rare. Yeah. So she had great instincts on what she liked and used.
Well, I also think, too, when you go to some antique stores and they have the old living collecting stories up, where they're trying to show you how you can use it and everything, and it kind of created an appetite. Yes. So, did you ever participate in insider trading?
No, I did not.
Just kidding.
No, but I have been accused of it. Yeah, the industry would be like, "Oh, well, aren't you clever? You can buy it all and then do a story about it." But I never did that. No. I didn't have enough time.
Yeah.
What was your at Martha? What was your favorite reproduction of something that you guys created? Do you think? Because I remember my mother-in-law buying a jadeite cake stand. And she just absolutely loved it. And it's this iconic thing. One, a cake stand, and two, that it was jadeite, and it was always been, it's always been there. But all of a sudden, it's on a cover, and people are looking at it a different way.
Well, I think that was always also the brilliance of Fritz and everybody, the stylists that would work on the catalog, is they would present everything in a way that modernized it and made you created an appetite for it.
And the displays, I think that.
There was, I think, showing the cake stands that have 3 different sizes tiered up and always had something beautiful on it, whether it was cookies or crafts or whatever. It was just an interesting. There was always a layer of things that helped to kind of give you ideas on what you could use this for. So the practicality side of it. To answer your question, I had never heard of Jet Air glass before. Martha.
Before that,
and I love that. I started collecting that after that. So that inspired me to collect.
Working there, you do learn a lot of that stuff. You learn a lot of things that we featured, and you take a deep dive in, and you actually are influenced by it, and say, you know what, I'm going to start looking for it. When I'm at flea markets or when I'm at tag sales. So it's always kind of fascinating. Yeah.
So after leaving, you and Rebecca Robertson, who you worked with on the collecting stories at Martha, worked on a book together.
Yes.
Called Collected. And it was living with collections we love, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And how did that come about?
Well, we were very proud of a lot of the work we did there. And, it's a large corporation at that point, the Omni Media. And, when it's a public company, it's about money. It's a corporation, so they were very focused on where is mass appetite, like chicken and cupcakes, right? It's like,
And glitter.
and glitter.
And glitter.
Yeah. And so our subject was never high up the hierarchy. And
Right.
so if they were going to make a book or do spin-offs, it was mostly food focused and how to feed a family or how to celebrate, make a party. But I was really proud of a lot of the work we did. And so I said to Rebecca, well, I think we should make it was a fascinating learning curve. I didn't know about making a book proposal and shopping a book project, and we learned all that. And we got really lucky that an editor at Abrams was a fan, and so she gave us a book contract to make. And so then we just had contacted all the amazing photographers we'd worked with, that we loved working with, asking if we could reuse, because the photographers own the imagery, not the magazine, except in rare cases, and what we could get within our budget or their pay for the use of it. And then we also created a lot of new content for the book too, things that we
just sort of just weave it through.
Well, once, in the book proposal, we had to figure out what is this book? How is it structured? Why would it be unique or different? And once we came on to the personality hook, that each chapter would be a different type of collector, the minimalist, the maximalist, that once we had that hook, then obviously a lot of the previous work we had done with photographers, some of it fit into those categories and some of it didn't. Right. So then we had to create, we had to fill out the fantasy we had by making new content.
After publishing your book, you opened an Etsy shop called
the
Collecting
publisher
Co?
said that, social media is such a marketing tool for the book. They wanted us to have a presence, so we opened an Etsy store.
What prompted you to go to Etsy as opposed to... did it just open up like eBay and from the Tomato Factory?
Well, no, I had, through friends who did those mediums and worked in those platforms, I had formed a personal opinion of what I liked and didn't like about that, because it's so different than bricks and mortar stores. Yeah. And I loved the original premise of Etsy, that it was about handmade makers, crafters, and then they had this vintage component, that was a small secondary part of it, and I liked that union of the two ideas. And also their business equation was very generous, it wasn't really expensive, and they weren't greedy. What I thought, for what they provided, it was a very great deal, as a consumer, to be in their stable if they took you on. I mean, before that we did eBay One King's Lane.
One King's Lane.
Yeah. That was another thing we did to promote the book. And that was a fascinating learning curve also. But that kind of was an idea that fashioned out very quickly. It went on for so many years, and then it just stopped, basically. Yeah. First Dibs is in a whole different level of dealing, and the overhead to be on that site was a lot more money than I wanted to invest, because you really need to be selling more substantial, valuable things to make all the percentages
that it requires,
that First Dibs keeps, to make it business viable. Yeah. And right at that point was when I can't remember his name, the man who invented First Dibs. He was incredible, Michael something. He had sold the business. Okay. So it suddenly was evolving also, that it was really changing.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also nice, too, because you do other things, you have other jobs, so it gives you the freedom to scale the business up and scale the business down when it's appropriate for you too, right?
Yeah. And I personally enjoy, it's a very tactile thing to me, just once again, I'm digging in the dirt. Yeah. I love to touch it, see it, the quality, the color, the quality of the material, the scale of it. To me, I like to experience it in person, and still do. I don't really like clicking and dragging in the middle of the night. And, you don't really know what... it's a surprise what's gonna arrive. I still like to buy in person, and that's why I've always kept the shop, because I think there's a lot of people that enjoy the real experience.
So Fritz, after leaving Martha, we
made the book.
You made the book, but you also work with your partner David man.
Yes, yeah, he has a thriving architectural firm, and he is, totally dedicated architect and loves architecture. But once again, the folly there is that the interiors division, when his clients would want him to do everything for them, just like I'm supposed to dress the people as well as feed them, he's supposed to do the whole house.
Right.
And he doesn't really enjoy that as much as the architecture and making of buildings and spaces, but it's more lucrative than. And his design division didn't really have any sense about the styling of finishing a room, all that stuff that makes it.
Right.
They're very good at getting all the functional furniture and all the structural lighting and everything, but they never got to that because it was not the original goal of the company.
Right.
So they started hiring me to come, and they would get projects when they had great clients that would have change their lives or scale up or have another home, and they'd want you just to do everything. In our days in commercial photography, yes, it's all about speed and time, or catalog work, it's about timing, fast. And it was also about money, like the budgets. In this case, it was more, the one thing I learned that the customers I deal with now, the one thing they can't buy is time. So they don't want to wait. Right. They'll pay anything, but they don't want to wait. And so it's
like immediate satisfaction when
and so they will, they bought a new house and they want to use it in a certain season and they just want it done. Right. How fast?
Right.
And so that's a whole new world to me. It's like, how fast can you shop? Not find it at a better price.
The immediacy.
Yeah. It's very interesting, and on a whole different level. Once again, you're always learning. I love books. That's why I wanted to make a book. I think books are the most amazing thing. A library is, the most biggest necessity to me.
Yeah. And
public libraries. And then suddenly I would be told the architect designed an entire room with shelves. What do we put on it? And they'd be like, oh, we should have a library. And so I would get to buy a whole library for the client, for the beach house, because they just want to look smart.
Right.
And culture.
Is that a trip to Strand or Argosy that
Oh, my God. You have no idea.
Books by the foot.
Yeah.
And then I kind of wanted to bring in, because I remember when my mom first got to meet you, we were actually shopping at Perkiomenville Flea Market. Mm-hmm. And she came up to me and she's like, did you know that he collects chairs made with chainsaws? And I said, no, I did not. But I was thinking it might be fun to give people like a window into the types of things that you currently collect that are personal collect.
Oh, well, I was fascinated by, and I've yet to get there, it's a personal goal, is the chainsaw competitions that are like in New England, upstate New York, because not only is it what they make, but they're timed.
Yeah.
And so it's like they would make a child's chair out of a log with a chainsaw in 1 minute and 4 seconds. It's like, and they look like, something from Bedrock on the Flintstones.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was amazed, like the thing, or they would do like whimsies as a whole category in the 19th century of whittling, where, it's a ball within a thing where it can be incredibly sophisticated, but they do it with a chainsaw, and it couldn't be more. It's like, did a blind person make this? But I loved it, and people ask me what I collect, and I've always said my 4 categories are large, useless, heavy, and broken. It's like somehow those are the 4 things I can always seem to find.
Those categories probably go with a lot of things in life. Boyfriends, houses.
Oh my God. But I've always loved chairs. Chairs, for some reason, to me, are an incredible sculptural, functional thing.
And you like little chairs, big chairs, all chairs?
Well,
they fall in the categories.
I don't have room to keep buying chairs. I really was going to have to be put away. And, when I had my first proper apartment in New York City, I remember having people over, and, a normal person was part of the posse, and they were like, do you realize you have 68 chairs in this room? And I'm like, I do not. And then I was like, oh my God, they're right. I have 68 chairs in this room. And so I started collecting doll furniture, because you can get a lot more chairs.
and less room to store them.
And especially homemade ones. And
Yeah.
then I'm fascinated by, what I call scrap craft, all the things that were made. I mean, that's a story I never got to do. I love like the things they would make out of birch matchsticks and folded gum wrappers.
Yeah.
And there's all these categories.
Yeah.
Tramp art is part of that.
Leftover leather.
Yeah, the leather scrapping. Yeah, it's an incredible world of...
Yeah.
Your peach pit baskets.
Yeah.
See, I could go on.
Yeah.
But we will. We will stop.
Carved stone fruit is another category.
Carved stone fruit.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess it's time to ask your best advice that you would give to somebody and the best advice you ever received.
Oh, well, I guess I would quote my dad, who sat me down probably when I thought, I'm going to art school. He said to me, because we were instilled with a sense of like a work ethic that you have to work and you have to support yourself.
Yeah.
Like there's no free ride here.
Yeah.
He said, the real trick in life is to find out something that you really enjoy doing. And if you can find a job that they're going to pay you to do it, that's an amazing achievement because you're going to be working for most of your adult life. Mm-hmm. So the trick is to figure out something that's the lucky ones in the world that get to do things they find really rewarding rather than the poor folks that are like
struggling to figure out what it is.
Just to make ends meet and not really enjoying any part of that energy. I mean, I think that was great advice. And another famous stylist, one time I was on a catalog, I had the opportunity to go to a catalog shoot in another country, and I was kind of nervous about, oh my goodness, how do you get it all there and the whole thing and not speaking the language. And she just said to me, she's like, take the job. She goes, go get somebody to pay you to go somewhere. You won't cost you a dime. You may like it. You may not like it. You could say you've been there. Maybe you'll love it. You didn't pay to go.
That's
Which I
great.
thought was really great advice. Just like do it.
That's
just
fantastic
do it.
advice.
And that connects to the advice I guess I would give people is that the whole concept of luck and people, you've been so lucky in your career, or if people believe in luck or they don't. I really think you make the opportunity for luck, or you make the opportunity for opportunity by just getting up every day, being really curious. And somebody else's father, this famous decorator, told me his dad, I think it's Miles Rhett, is a famous decorator. He told me his dad said, it's simpler than you think. 95% of the people don't get up and go to work every day. If you just get up and try every day, you have an enormous advantage. And I think that's really good advice.
It's very good advice.
Yeah.
I would say, just get out there and try and be open-minded. What's the worst that can happen? Somebody paid you to do something you don't like,
At least you got paid. So we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back and finish up with what's inspiring us lately.
Okay.
So, Marcy, what's inspiring you this week?
This week. It's not very glamorous.
Why?
But I have 2 columns on my front porch. I'm in the midst of like home renovation, and my philosophy is what's embarrassing me the most with my house right now, and that's what I deal with. So I have 2 columns that are wood columns that are starting to show a little bit of wood rot. So I was doing a little research, and I ended up buying this product called liquid epox and wood epox, and it's a 2-part system. I used it to repair the column. So the first part is the liquid part. You put it on, and it hardens the softened wood, and then you can putty and fill in, and it sands like wood and shapes like wood, and then when you paint it, you could actually stain it, but I'm just going to paint it.
Is it sort of a yellow a resin when it dries? Is it that one?
It's like a butter yellow color.
Butter yellow.
Yeah. So it's been kind of great. I've never used it before, but I'm inspired by it because I use Bondo for a lot of stuff, and it can be a little toxic and smelly. So
Yeah, and it's not.
yeah.
Oh.
No, it's not. I think it's pretty I don't know if it's completely non-toxic, but it's definitely not noxious.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
So,
great.
not very glamorous, not very exciting, but that's what I got this week. How about you, Mel?
I was in a bookshop in Madrid, and unfortunately this volume of books was in Spanish, and I wanted to buy it, but I thought, I'm going to wait till I get back to the U.S. But it's called The Dictionary of Color Combinations by this Japanese designer of kimonos and lifestyle, and from 1934. It's from 1933 to 34. His name is Sanzo Wada, and it's sort of an inspiring because it reminds you of, remember in foundation year in art school, you did color studies where you had to have a purple and a yellow, and you had to do 10%, and you had to keep going till you got to the other. So it's sort of in that vein, but it's taking color combination. There's like 70 or so color combinations that really work together, and they're very timeless in a way, because they were done back then and in the 30s, but they're really relevant today because there's a lot of tonal things in them. So, I understand, I researched a little bit, and fashion stylists are using it for the combinations to study, and interior designers are looking at it for new combinations. So I'm going to get the book. I'm going to finally get the book here when I have a chance.
Oh, that's cool.
And Fritz?
Fritz, how about you?
I realize I've always been drawn to geology. That geology to me is like the cornerstone, because depending what you do with it or add to it, like the effects of time, heat, or temperature, it's like it makes pottery, it makes glass. And just in its rock form, all the variety of different geologies. Yeah. And there is this big glamorous pile in Florence that was the Medici's Winter Palace. And, it's a giant, fancy, gilded house filled with many, many paintings. But when you go through the rooms, they have the most dazzling collection of micro-mosaic tabletops. I don't know if you know what micro-mosaic is. An art form that it's Naples specialized in, where they sort all different kinds of fantastical national geology by color, and then they basically make collages like they're making paintings, but they're only using geology. And it's unbelievable, the skill with there's this one pair of tables in that palace that it's as if you're looking through clear water to the sea bottom, and it's all seashells and coral, and it almost feels like it's moving, and you can't believe how beautiful it is, and it's all geology. That's really? Cut and sliced. And still life is another, Etruscan urns and like an artful Roman composition. Like it just sometimes they're purely geometric, the more famous ones, where it's just to show off. Like it was, in collecting, especially like in Italy, if you're like one of the ruling Italian families or the Pope, or you're the aristocrats of the great dynasties, one of the things they would show off and competitively collect was obscure foreign geology. And so they would incorporate it into the furniture, into the architecture, and it will be about, this is completely obsolete. I mean, don't get me started. I don't know if you know about porphyry. And one of the reasons that the Romans wanted to conquer Egypt is because they had the only porphyry.
What is porphyry?
It's a kind of stone that is red and speckled, and it's the hardest geology in terms of how to work it. Okay. And the Egyptians, they made everything out of it, but they had the secret of how to cut it and what the tools were to cut it and work it. And that's what the Romans were after, and found the quarry with a half-abandoned obelisk, so they could understand how they... But anyway, the history of geology in Italy, and you think about all the quarries, but the micro-mosaics, there's also a collector, I think lived in L.A., believe it or not, but he collected great... Because if you were, all that, and you went on grand tour in the 18th century as an aristocrat, you would go to Italy, of course, all the ancient sites, and you would bring back, and they would make these amazing tabletops that would have all the famous sites of Rome in micro-mosaic, or this or that. And this gentleman and his wife in LA collected the most incredible pile, or they would make you think it's a painting from across the room. And you realize it's all tiny chips of, and the V&A in London has this man's collection. He must have given it after he passed away, and there's a whole room filled with the tables and the paint and the wall pieces, and I'm obsessed. It's just so beautiful. The workmanship, the craftsmanship, the fact that this is nature, that this is just organizing, sorting, and collecting on a level.
All done before electricity, all done before.
Oh my God.
That's what always amazes me about the craft.
You'll see little pins and things that tourists brought back that are very rudimentary, micro-mosaic, but when you see the great masters, and I'm telling you, these tabletops in the Medici Palace is something, I couldn't believe it was real. It's so dazzling. There's one that's some famous battle, and the whole sea, all the blue, the lapis, the way they made the ocean is unbelievable.
That's amazing.
It's just so inspiring to me.
We'll post some of those if we can, and links.
I can give you some pictures.
Well, Fritz, thank you so much. And we forgot to introduce your special guest, Tulip.
Miss
people may have
Tulip
heard.
came
Miss Tulip
today.
is here. You
Also
might have
came
heard her.
today.
You might have heard her.
She had an opinion or two.
Earlier in an episode. She's absolutely adorable.
But this was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
If you want to learn more about Fritz's work, please be sure to check out our show notes as well as our website, www.alifecreativepod.com.
Our producer is Chris Kangas. Our theme music was composed by Pierce McIntyre. And a special thanks to all the amazing people at East 10th House Studio.